All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today on maximizing the impact of your micro events. So excited to talk about this with Mark and Becky. Micro events are a deal near and dear to my heart. I just actually participated in a micro event, which was my wedding about a month ago. We invited about 30 to 40 close family members. And the whole time that we were talking, Becky, Mark, and I were talking about micro events and how they relate to, your team strategy. I was just thinking a lot about the decisions we made during our wedding, right? Like, okay, who do I want to be there, right? Like who is actually really close? Who are the people that I really want to meet up together with? What are some of the budget conscious ways that I can think about, how I'm running this wedding? Things like that really, really related well to our micro event strategy. Also very glad that it's over. So again, having that wedding thing all in the past is great. Believe it or not, when you work at an event tech company, there are high expectations for your wedding. So feel free to throw in the comments if you had a similar experience. Speaking of comments, on the right-hand side of your screen, you will see buttons to add to the chat. Feel free to throw any of your thoughts, comments, opinions, compliments, in the chat throughout this webinar, along with Q&A. On the right-hand side, you'll see Q&A. We did get a ton of great questions in the reg form leading up to this webinar. So I'm going to ask a few of those as we go through this whole shebang. Thank you to all who sent in those questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we possibly can. All right. So with that being said, I would love to bring Becky and Mark to the virtual floor so we can get this show on the road. That's enough, hearing about me. So we'll start with Becky. Becky, do you mind introducing yourself to everyone?
Yeah. Thanks, Patrick. Hi, everybody. So Becky Martins. I run the revenue marketing team over at Jellyfish based in the Boston area. Been in the B2B tech space for over 15 years, SaaS specifically for about maybe 8 or 9 years. And just the topic of events is one that is near and dear to my heart. I've run corporate events teams, field marketing teams. I've been a field marketer and ABX marketer, as well as running those functions. And it's really just a very unique and special tactic that we have used, for years to bring communities together and to engage them in meaningful ways. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Also, your natural light is immaculate. I am so jealous. So whimsically look out that window during the day. You too, Mark. Mark, do you mind introducing yourself to everyone?
Would be happy to. Great to be with you, Patrick and Becky. Mark Killens. I'm the co-founder, CEO of TAC. TAC is like 3 different things. Media network. We have an on-demand GTM service firm component. And then we actually have a small club and community we call Club PF. Like Becky, I have been involved in MarTech, sales tech for about 15 or so years. I was at HubSpot for a long time, Drift after that, and most recently at a company called AirMeet. I was the CMO. That's a webinar event technology company. Pumped through the conversation. I agree with you both. Micro events, huge potential. And I really feel like they're going to have an amazing 2024. I think this is like a year that micro events are going to continue to shine, but probably shine a bit brighter.
For sure, for sure. So 2023 is the year of Taylor Swift, right? And then 2024 is micro events. So
has to be.
So also, I love having the two of y'all here because you both have run events yourselves, right? But also have like the bigger picture of how events fit in with the rest of your whole marketing, revenue, go-to-market strategy. I think that's absolutely awesome. My name is Patrick. I lead customer marketing here at Swoogo. Swoogo is an event management software, but you didn't come here to learn from me, to hear from me. You came here to learn from Mark and Becky. So first, Mark, the first question is to you, and we got this a lot in the Q&A. What is a micro event? What do you consider to be a micro event?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I'm not going to say it depends, even though it kind of does, right, Becky? But I believe it's an intimate event where true connection and shared experience can happen. So I'm not putting a size to that. I'm not saying it's 20 people or 50 people. It could be a range, right? It could be 3 people. It could be, maybe up to 50, 100 people, depending on how it's designed. But it's the intimacy and the deep connection and that shared experience is how I think about it.
Yeah,
for sure. Becky, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, that's a giant +1 for me, Mark. I think the word community just keeps coming to my mind in relation to the question. So it's the community that you bring together locally that you then curate in this experience, whether it's 5 or 50 people. And it's then the ongoing community you hopefully have created and curated that can then continue to build together from. And you can also re-engage down the line as well. So it's a really special tactic. And it's one that if you just love the creative side of marketing, you can get extremely creative with in creating those really special, meaningful moments within.
Becky, you make a great point there. My son just built a paper chain. You know how you make those paper chains?
Yeah.
And he made it for like Christmas. And that's what a good micro event strategy is. Each micro event is a chain in the paper and it keeps building that sense of community. I love that.
Okay.
That's awesome. I think that's a great segue into the question, which is why are folks leaning into micro events? Mark, why do you think that micro events are going to have a big year in 2024?
There's tons of reasons. One is, budget. Obviously, there's still been this, inflation thing happening to all of us. Events have gotten more expensive. I also feel like, marketing teams, especially in tech, have been unfortunately impacted because of the economic conditions, and that means less resources. So you got to be smarter with stuff that you have at your disposal, and also a bit more targeted, bit more like specific with what you do. Micro events are perfect for that. What do you think, Becky? I could keep going, but what are some of your top ones?
Yeah, I think it's also the way that people want to engage these days. I think there's been so many shifts that we've all lived through. We've seen, on the marketing, on the B2B front as well, that, the old days of just large trade shows or giant user conferences, like there's still a place for that at times. But I think just the way that people have evolved of just wanting more unique experiences, more personalized experiences, also flexible experiences where it could be still from your office or kitchen or in a local restaurant or a really great third-party location that just kind of cuts through the noise and brings people together. Probably something that people have been missing over the last few years as well. We definitely, at least where I was coming from Zora prior to being at Jellyfish, we had a lot of field events. That was just a part of our organic strategy. And then we kind of pivoted during COVID and then started to see some really interesting traction coming out of that, of just people wanting to lean in more, both us on the execution side and wanting to lean in more into our strategy and programming, but people wanting to kind of get back out there. But it did allow us just to kind of reimagine the model as well.
For sure. Becky, one of the things you mentioned before was making sure that things have a very clear purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of like, why are you running this micro event? I'm curious, just for folks who are on the call that are, debating whether or not micro events are right for them or thinking about, their strategy for 2024, what are some of the reasons why you decided to host micro events? Or what are some of those like purposes that you brought people together for?
Yeah, I love to be really hypothesis driven when we're testing different things, whether it's events or any really tactic or program. So we tend to start with a point of view or hypothesis to say, based on some either database or anecdotal point of view, we feel like there's some kind of need state to, like in this example, bring this community of people together for XYZ reason to accomplish Y. And, one example may be we have a hypothesis that if we brought together in-stage deals, with close dates of this quarter and next, and if we were able to get them together in a very small space, an intimate space, with a partner, a happy customer, some of our executives, we think that, we would have a, 3x higher likelihood of closing them. But then I think other use cases could also be, on the customer side, we want to retain customers, and we think we can see a higher or stronger lift in our green health scores within our customer base or a lift in NPS if we had more of a consistent FaceTime with, different customers in different regions. So then it leads to a strategy of we want to curate different groups of customer communities, maybe even have them host some of these programs too. Mm-hmm. So I think it just depends on the hypothesis, kind of the goals that you want to accomplish. There's not one size fits all. I think there's different variations of when micro events make sense, maybe when they don't. And then being able to design the right experience around it.
I love all that. I think micro events unite both your community of buyers, customers, and fans, to your point, Becky, and they also should be designed to unite the marketing with the sales team, or the marketing and the CS team, or sales, CS, and marketing, because you should build your micro event strategy together. I know we'll get to this a bit later, Patrick, and about the tactics and specifics. That, what you just said though, Becky, reminded me of something that HubSpot did very early on. My wife was actually the program manager of this program for about 2 years. We did not meet at HubSpot, by the way. We met outside HubSpot. But anyway, she joined HubSpot. And it's called the HubSpot user groups. Go to HubSpot user groups, type into Google. That is a collection of micro events where, to your point, Becky, HubSpot is enabling a host to host a micro event. I went around the country, even world, speaking at HubSpot user groups, and that is just an amazing program. And yeah, maybe not to that scale you do it, but those are very special events that brought together all these people. And then with the right, like now, with data now, I think when you think about that type of event experience and how you can activate it more from like a revenue standpoint, you can do some pretty interesting things.
I agree. And I think also a different use case, so maybe outside of the ones I was just mentioning, back to like large third-party events or these large one-to-many events, I think micro events become a really interesting way to reimagine that strategy too. So how do you cut through the noise and all of the different things that people have to choose from, or they may be able to engage with, and be able to bring together curated audiences where they may not have that opportunity to engage with other like-minded customers at AWS reInvent this week, or whatever it may be. So I think, it's kind of endless. There's a lot of different ways that you can engage this tactic or bring this tactic into your strategy. I think it just depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But I'd like to always start first with the goals versus let's just host an event. And then sometimes if you start there, maybe there's a reason once in a blue to do that. You may run into trouble that it just wasn't clear on the goals and who should be in the room and what they want to get out of it, that it gets a little bit muddy down the road.
Absolutely. I love the idea of having a hypothesis that everything leads up to, right? Of like making sure like this is our North Star, this is what we're hoping to prove, right? That as you're going through the whole event life cycle, you have that one North Star to always point to. So where do you think, and you touched on this a little bit about like what audiences you drive, when we think about the sales cycle, or, if maybe you're not at an organization that drives those sales, right? Maybe you do like a nonprofit or a trade association, right? Where do you think micro events fit the best in that, person's life cycle with your brand and with your organization?
Yeah. I have some.
I'll give that one to Becky.
Okay. I'm going to have it at mark. It depends. But if I had to pick, I think it depends also on just where you're looking to host these. So I'd say my main use case typically on the prospect side would be where you have some type of current engagement, meaning you have, third or first party intent being surfaced. You can see that they may have some level of readiness or in market. Maybe they're starting to engage with you to some degree, but they haven't really taken that next step to have more meaningful conversations and getting to know you in a more meaningful way. So when I was running a field marketing team, and even when I was a field marketer, and it led to kind of joint ABX focus as well, that was a really important tactic for us that we would look at, like our MQAs, for instance, or where we had like early meetings, but not yet pipeline in certain accounts. And this was a way that we could help, again, the hypothesis-driven approach, that we can move these folks further along the journey by getting them together. And it's not just to talk about, our company, but to talk about the things that they're likely wrestling with, and to build that community of other folks that are kind of working through that as well, which then inherently leads to more interesting conversations down the road for us as well. So I'd say that's a big one for me. I think the customer one is still related, but a bit different. So it's not just for prospects. Actually, best case is you get both of those groups in the same room, definitely not one or the other only. So we talked about some of the customer use cases. I'd say the other one that maybe like that colder prospect angle, like I think one example for that would be if you're going to that trade show and you have the ability to either have a booth and hopefully the right people, have a sea of 3,000 come by and can talk to you. That's one strategy. Or if you hosted a really interesting micro event within that program, would you have the ability to potentially target the right people to get the right interesting accounts and, prospect titles and customer titles in the room to then engage with each other and us. So probably not a single answer. That warm account is still my favorite one, but there's definitely a few different places where these make sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love the idea of borrowing a different audience when you go to these like trade shows. Like, how do you make sure if you're trying to get some top of funnel stuff going through, like using the third party events at trade shows and other large events is such a great idea there. Mark, what about you? Do you have any thoughts on where these micro events live within the sales or contact cycle?
I'll give it a suggestion / maybe example. Like stage a company is important along with your ACV. So if you're like an early stage company and you just don't have a lot of awareness, and you minimal pipeline in terms of you don't have like long sales cycles, right? Like you have like maybe very short sales cycles, and you don't have a ton of open pipeline that's trying to mature. You might spend 3 months or 6 months just doing a sprint of micro events to activate an audience, and you also probably will arguably want to do some online micro events too, or tie that into some maybe slightly larger online events, or maybe a slightly larger in-person event if you have the means to do that. That's the key. But I do feel like you have like event-led kind of first strategy, event-led growth, content-led growth. Like I fundamentally believe that when it comes to companies formation, events are one of the best ways to get going, because as Becky, they're a great way to also create content and get feedback about so much that matters to when the company's getting started. Flip side, if a company's much more mature, I agree with Becky. Like it's definitely more like pipeline, like warm pipeline creation, or like really pipeline acceleration to maturation, and then like pipeline when it comes to expansion of accounts that are already customers, and blending those together.
Mm-hmm. For sure. That ties really well into a question here from Susanna Gilbert, which was, how do you measure the ROI of events for reports to leadership? So when you're going to your leadership team, how do you show that, hey, this micro event that I just ran was totally worth it? Mark, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the idea of like the event technology you have and the revenue technology that you have got to be working well enough together. Like I would not, like, I mean, Becky, what do you think? Would you leave it to chance to have sales like input data and like rely on them to follow through? And I don't know, it's dangerous, right?
Are there salespeople on this call? What's mine? It's probably not the only way to do it, and probably not the only thing that we should be doing.
To me, it's like looking at like the dispersion of accounts that map within your ICP versus non-ICP segment, and then just where are they in the customer journey, and did it map to the hypothesis? I could not agree more with Becky when it comes to clearly setting the expectation for why you're doing this event, but also why would the person sign up and then show up and attend as well. There's 2 whys for me for every event. It's why is the business doing it, and why would the attendee find a lot of value and ultimately, hopefully, remember this and create a memorable moment for them. And those 2 things really have to try to be like related, like in some way. It's kind of hard sometimes, but I do think that when you think about leadership and what they expect, they want the money. We all want the money. Cash is everything, right? But you also have to show that how this is helping from like a brand standpoint, and how this is also helping create word of mouth. Word of mouth is one of the most effective channels, and micro events, hard to measure, but arguably would be a great way to activate word of mouth.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking about that too. Like, I think people get stuck sometimes on just like the event activity metrics, where it's like, oh, it's my reg number, my attendee number, and my conversion rate. Ta-da! Like, I did the thing. I got my 20 people there, and half of them showed up. I feel like that's just one tiny sliver of the pie. I think the business metrics matter. What did you generate in terms of your target accounts? How many did you get in the room? How many were able to convert to meetings, pipeline, and close? Also, if it was a acceleration event, how much ACV did you get in the room, and did that? Did those stages move forward? But there's definitely this brand play, and there's this sort of like intangible part of it too, which is really hard to measure. And I think you start to see that in more the long tail experience when you look at like the journey of an account, for instance. Like, we used to do this with some of our larger accounts. It may take 18 months to close XYZ Fortune 100 account, but if you look at all the meaningful touch points along the way, I'm going to bet that a couple of micro events are sprinkled in, because that was a really important measure of getting the right people in the room, building that rapport, that community that then built upon itself after the fact. And then I love what you said about word of mouth, because there's sort of that peripheral like experience, and also the micro events help bring together within your brand. So you have kind of the brand out in the ether, and then you have how the brand kind of comes together in these more intimate moments. And then some of the things you may see down the road, like a demo request form, like we have a how'd you hear about us field. The word of mouth piece is really interesting, and starting to see these types of events come through. Or, you may have seen someone come to an event a year ago, and then they talk to a couple of people, and suddenly they're former colleague is coming to you to learn more, and it all kind of connects. It doesn't always show up that way in a Salesforce report, so take it with a grain of salt, but like kind of that broader picture. It's not always easy to paint that picture, but it's an important one to focus on, kind of the tactical, the activity stuff, the pipeline, but also kind of those broader measures too, especially when you're talking long-term strategy and success.
That reminds me of one other tip that what you just said, Becky. One of the best things I did at my past companies is we created customer journeys to show both the executive team and the board. The board people love these because it really contextualizes all the numbers to show them, here's the 5 to 7 or 8 key moments in the marketing how marketing impacted this prospect to become a customer. And here's the 5 to 8 from a sales standpoint. And when you show that and you say, well, here's 1 or 2 or 3 events that they went to, it's like, there you go. That's all they need to see, right? It's like, because the numbers we all know can be cut a gazillion different ways, but creating customer journey slides of those 5 to 8 key moments. Yeah.
Exactly. And if that's maybe like a tip for the audience, if it starts to feel really nebulous of how you tell that story, think about that one great account that closed and you knew they attended this event a year ago. That's a really good contextual way to show the impact of a program, but flipped to one account's journey. Because imagine if you could do this and you get one account to close, like, a year later, we could do X fold if we continued.
Absolutely. I think this is where micro events are really special as a tool versus other large scale events. With micro events, you probably had a few different people on your team spend time with that individual. Since you have such a limited audience, you can do a lot better job at storytelling on like what their experience was at that event versus, at a large expo, it was like, I can maybe say what booths they went to, right? Yeah. But like, I'm not necessarily sure what their whole experience was and how that relates to other things as well. I think it's just a really, really cool tool in that sense. Okay, so that talks a lot about how do we plan and how do we strategize on our micro events? I want to talk a little bit more about how do we actually execute this thing? So when you think about where you want to host your micro event or what kind of micro events you want to do, what are some things that you're looking for when you're choosing the venue and the topic and things like that? What are some of the things that you're really thinking about when you're actually putting together a specific micro event? I'll give that one to you, Becky.
Okay, let me think how to frame this one. Well, first, I always like surprise and delight is a phrase that we use here at Jellyfish. So how do we always surprise and delight? Whether you're a technical engineer, you're a sassy marketer, kind of different personas and profiles, but how do you still surprise and delight and create a really memorable experience versus just an event? And I think there's a difference between those two things. So I think first in terms of like where you do it. So even for us, like we're making some refinements to our field event strategy next year, that instead of being like, hey, let's go do something at the Warriors game because that sounds cool. It's instead kind of like backing into a strategy based off of where we see some of the data telling us we should be going and doing these things. So based on concentrations or cohorts of accounts in certain regions that are open pipeline, happy customers, all that good stuff. The experience to me really matters. And, we would actually work with different vendors over time, instead of just going to, no offense, Morton's steakhouse, just a steakhouse dinner. How do you instead have more of an experiential element to the program that you run? So it's a really great dinner, but also there's something that's a special touch. So like you may have a Michelin star chef come out and actually, if it's his restaurant, sign some cookbooks that he may have published the year before and do a little bit of a demonstration, something that feels like kind of something you weren't expecting. And it stays behind with that person when they think back to that evening that they had 6 months ago. And boy, that was something really special. And then also the people that you have in the room matter, because you want to make sure people feel like it's the right type of experience for them, where they're going to get something meaningful out of it, who they're going to meet. So making sure you're just clear on kind of like the level of person or the different types of personas you want to have in the room. And then even like where you seat them matters too, because you can inspire some really interesting discussion there as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The litmus test you gave me that I loved was that, and I've been using this for my stuff, was when I'm trying to pitch this event, like I need to make it clear. Do you want to do it? Do you want to say? Oh
yeah. My favorite 3 bullets, which was drilled into me by a former CEO, and it's the best advice ever, would be, so if you think about the other kind of someone in the other shoes that's getting the email about the event you're going to, it would be, who am I going to meet? what am I going to learn? And what makes this experience so unique that's worth my time? It's worth not spending dinner with my kids that night or getting on the train and going into Boston, where I usually be remote that day. And so those three vectors, I think, are really important in how you design programs, but also how you promote them and you talk about them. And so that could look like in your email copy, being able to share logos of different, speakers who are going to be involved, but also attendees that are going to be in the room. Or even if you're just kicking off Reg, you could say, and this is always a trick of mine, this is a part of a series. This is a couple of sample logos of companies that have been in the room in past events, and you'll be meeting other folks very similar to them. So it's kind of an interesting bridge when you're just starting out, that you can kind of have that peppered in and then switch to maybe more actual registrants once you get your list going. And then the experience matters. So back to some of those special moments, how do you make that sing in your landing page copy, the email copy, the things that your BDR may be pitching on a call with a prospect? So those are three important elements, which was feedback I got a long time ago from a CEO of mine who was brilliant at events. And he was like, these are the three things that I require for someone to get my attention. And so it's been a really good piece of advice that I've carried through since.
It's an amazing mental model because, number one, it's about the why would I attend? Going back to the two types of whys. Fantastic. Everyone should just write that down and use it. It's spot on. And secondly, you do not underestimate how much you should think about the positioning of any type of event, definitely micro events included. And you just gave some great tips on how to weave in positioning. But the positioning is not your traditional company focused positioning, which is about like the benefit that this product will have on solving a problem and giving the company value that you will probably implement or use. It's a person focused positioning like level. It's very different. It's different yet slightly similar in terms of positioning, but it is very different. So when it comes to events, it is a product. A micro event is a product you're serving up to someone, and how you position it to a person is very important.
100%. And you'll see the difference in your results. I feel like people who skip that step that'll be the difference of good versus great.
Agreed. And then the other thing that you can do when it comes to your question, Patrick, is I focus on how many of the senses am I going to activate at this event? That's always been something that I've thought about for a long time. And we have five. I mean, you get the sixth sense, but like the five senses. And if I can activate all five senses at that event, it should be a really home run, as long as it matches to the audience, to your point, Becky, and whatnot. But that to me is really important.
Interesting. Yeah. So like smell, sight, touch.
Like a checklist.
Do I not know the senses?
Hearing. Sight used to say, yeah.
Okay, perfect smell. Perfect. Yeah. That's really cool. That's a really cool concept. I love how you're leaning into the experience part of it, right? Like, how is this not just a dinner, right? How is this not just a pitch to learn about what we do? How does this create like a holistic experience that touches on all five of the senses? Interesting. I love that concept. I love the concept a lot. Okay, so when you're thinking about what types of micro events do I want to run? When I think about like, do I want to do a happy hour, or do I want to do a dinner? Do I want to do a lunch? When you're thinking about, what audience you're going to go to, you have a hypothesis on what you want to get done. How do you make sure that your micro experience fits the goals that you're hoping to achieve? So I'm curious, Mark, do you mind diving into that a little bit?
So I would think about it for bigger events. You have to do this, in my opinion. So this concept of like design partners, it comes from like product kind of led motion, or just comes from like how you build product typically these days, where you partner with 10, 15, 20 people, alpha, beta users, and like they're partnering with you in the design of the product experience. And then that helps you really understand how to refine it. And then when you go to market, you have 10, 15 people that are seeing value that help you design it. It's great. You can do the same thing from an event standpoint. Micro events is a little bit trickier because they're smaller. But that being said, I still think you need to use a concept like that to just kind of gut check your assumptions of like what people will enjoy and not enjoy. I mean, you're going to have to take some risks nonetheless, but I do feel like going to the audience first. And ultimately, if you could give them 2 or 3 options to help guide you in what's best, or if like, you had a micro event that could be segmented in 2 or 3 different experiences and you give them those options, which you sometimes do see, that is like ultimate. But for me, it's about trying to think through what is unique and different. That's my ultimate guardrail as well. Like the senses, but like if it's not unique and different, going back to what your CEO was saying, Becky, it's like, I don't know, like, is it going to get my attention? Is it going to really get me into that place? Is it, 30-minute drive, hour drive? It's got to be something unique and different that I haven't really seen.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I just keep going back to just like the goals and the hypothesis, because I think a lot of that drives ultimately the tactics and the things you want to go and build. So if your goal, for instance, if you're at reInvent this week and your goal is to get from the sea of, I don't know how many people are there, hundreds of thousands of people, and you want to get in front of, 500, the goal, the tactic is then a happy hour versus a dinner, because that then meets the goals of what you're trying to do, kind of going from one to maybe one to few. But if instead you're like, my goal is to get in front of 10 of the best executives of the best accounts of our list of 100, that then tells you it's not a happy hour. Actually, it would be some kind of an intimate special programming that you're going to blow out of, or knock out of the park, that's going to get their attention. That's going to be unlike anything else that's arriving in their inbox. And so I think being really clear on just the who, the what, the why up front helps then design the tactical execution plan. And then just remembering, like, we're all people at the end of the day. So for instance, I'm a mom of a 3-year-old, and I go in the office maybe one day a week. It's typically never on a Monday, because Mondays are crazy in this house. So, doing a dinner on a Monday night is also really hard. So, just trying to think about, like, who is my ICP? Who are these people? Who are they in their personal lives? Would a lunch be more convenient, or is it a dinner after work? Is it maybe a Tuesday, Thursday? It's when most people tend to be in the city again, in their offices in a hybrid way. And then kind of just marrying those two things where it feels like you can connect the dots of the kind of the business goals and also just the personal experiences and the personal interests of, your actual end buyers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love the idea of looking to your user personas and your buyer personas and things like that in order to figure out who you or how you can, frame this experience. Great. I did have a question here, which was, is there anything that you should avoid doing at your micro events? They specifically asked, are there any things that you failed at dinners and happy hours? I'm curious.
I'll say one really quick, talking at the audience, talking at the people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus one of that, like feeling like you need to have prepared content, feeling like you need to have a slide deck. You got to have something that you're drilling into them. You got to give them the product pitch. Like that's when it starts to feel like you're in a sales pitch, you're in a sales meeting, and this isn't natural and organic. There are interesting ways. I have one interesting idea that we've done as just like a alternative. We've done conversation menus at tables where instead of it being a slide deck with even like 2 or 3 slides to frame the conversation, we've done a really simple small document. It can go in someone's place setting or in a little stand in the middle of the table. And it's just very curated prompts and questions that will have someone internally kind of be more of like the captain and sort of guide the conversation. So we can talk about some of the interesting business questions and things that we want to get to at some point. And that's a way that you can kind of bring that into the conversation without it feeling like it's forced and you have to have prepared content. So I think keeping this as everyone's, at the end of the day, an individual who wants to have a nice time and not feel talked to and have this feel natural. And there's probably different things you can dial up and dial down. And that's spoken from past experience of probably not doing that at all stages of my life. So back to you, those that have failed, have tried the other, it doesn't always work. So this is something that we've evolved to.
Perfect. Yeah, I was thinking about as a closeted introvert, I'm like, when I go to those events, I love having like the one sheet or like what are some questions I can ask for folks rather than, trying to start up conversation with someone new. That's great. All right. So as we're thinking about after the event, right? So like you've hosted this event, you've had a great experience, you met your ICP, like where they were, they had a great time. How do you make sure that your follow-ups after that are like right on the mark? That they lead to, your goals, things like that. So how do you handle follow-ups after these events? Mark, I'll kick that one to you.
This might be unpopular or, people might not be thinking about it, but like for events that are pipeline focused, that are op created, you never send these to a BDR or SDR. Never. Like, I have, and I regret it. I don't think it's a good move. typically for that type of event, going back to Becky's point around goals and the why, like those are ideal customers, ideal fits. And then you're going to have someone who probably doesn't have the right training and context and understanding of what just happened in that special moment. Do follow up. You just can't do it. Right? So you have to, one of the keys to unlocking the full potential of micro events is enabling the people who are going to continue the experience post the event. And I don't think enough organizations do that. I'm definitely guilty of that in the past. So how you enable that small group or larger group of people that will do follow-up should probably happen pre-event, number one. And number two, like sometimes they will be the people that get the folks to the event. So some of the things that I see now with some of our TAC customers is we have AEs inviting people to a very intimate event with the CEO, but the AE won't be there. But the AE knows what's going on. They're inviting them. The event happens. The CEO debriefs, and then the AE continues that experience. So it's just like that integration of the experience is super important.
Plus one to that. I was going to actually, perfect tee up actually. My favorite way to kick off the follow-up process is just to know who's hosting your event day of, which could be an executive like your CEO the day, that night of, or it may even be like a customer if it's like one of those user-led community events or user events. And so it's always great to kind of tie off at the end of the night or the next day of just a warm thank you from that person, but also just an introduction to everyone else who was there so you can help not just create the connection for the company to then hopefully further nurture these accounts for our, personal goals, but also they can continue that sense of community and connective tissue building that we want to also happen within the group that we brought together. So we've always done that. Usually there's some type of a kind of follow-on value add, a piece of content we've been talking about. Here's that link. So there's kind of a reason to reach out as well. And I'd say on like the field side, this would definitely not be, to your point, like BDRs cold calling a list of like open pipeline deals that are there and they're the wrong person. We've always kind of done it kind of case by case, where if the goal of the event was deal acceleration, and if that rep or sales manager has that close relationship with that champion who was there, it may just be a quick check-in, how'd it go, anything I can help answer questions on, but it's definitely a soft touch. Or if anything, it's more, hey, I thought you may also find this interesting. And it could be back to like the next webinar we have going on the topic or that piece of content, but it's not, hey, you want to take a meeting? Because that kind of just feels like, just deflated the balloon of everything you just built towards. And it's really meant to be the long tail that you're building with a micro event versus that quick instant gratification of like pipeline or a closed deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the tips I got was to have someone at the event whose like full job is just to constantly take notes on what's happening, onto what things people are, saying, what are the advices that they're giving, questions that they're asking, and make sure that you hand that over to whoever needs to handle, the outreach afterwards, to make sure that it's like obviously has those ties directly to what you covered there. Yeah, for sure. I thought that was really helpful. But also just, I love the idea of tying it back to your community, right? That's what it's all about, right? Is how do you make people feel closer to you, closer to your brand, closer to the other folks in the room? I think it's really important. All right, so this is the last question I had. But how do you use the information that you gathered at these micro events? Mark, you had mentioned that one of the great ways, or one of the great reasons that you want to host these micro events is to get feedback in real time. What do you do with that information after the event? What do you recommend?
So the comment you just made is spot on. You definitely should have someone trying to take notes. I mean, I don't think any of these events will be recorded. Typically, maybe if you do an online one, they might be, but even then it's like not, the space doesn't feel as intimate. I definitely would have someone taking notes. I have seen the host be able to do that, but that, depending on who the host is, that could be tricky. For me though, you want to have, you want to also take advantage of like the media, so the multimedia that can come from this. So if you're going to do a micro event with some customers, especially, it would, you don't have to do this every time, but it'd typically be valuable to have someone there to take photos and do video. Again, not every time, but we did this a lot at Drift, where you would just have someone, spend an hour out of the 3 hours or whatever it is, 30 minutes out of the 2 hours, and you capture some type of content in that format. And this is the snackable micro content. And I don't think enough companies do this either. And I don't know why. I just think it's like it's another cost slightly, but it's also, coordinations, but it's not taxing. And if you can line some of these up ahead of time with the people that are coming and say, hey, would you mind doing a 3-minute thing about this? It's going to be nothing. And then give them a nice gift, another special moment at the micro event for them to do that. And then also just take pictures of the event and use that as your content. And then if someone is taking notes or someone has taken the TLDR down, that starts to then give you ammo for like the marketing team, but also for like the product team or the sales team or whomever, right? So I do think for anything in business and in life, there's always this like crawl, walk, run, or some type of maturity, model to it. The stuff I was just mentioning is definitely more, advanced, but I definitely think it's worth doing.
Yeah, I love the snackable content concept. I feel like there's a lot like just quick things you can always do, like what are like the 5 hot takes from that event, or what are the 5 hot topics, and that could curate a really quick blog post after the fact that was inspired by discussion at this great event. Or maybe it's like a follow-up social post from the company who hosted it, and it's the 5 things, and it encourages more discussion in like a broader organic setting online. So like I love the content piece, and then just more on like the business side, like process that we always have here would be like prior to the event, we put together something called the dossier, which is just a really quick prep doc with anyone that's driven someone to the event. It's dropped their headshot in, who they are, and like, what do we think they care about? What are our goals with this person or for this person at the event, to make sure that the on-site folks kind of have the full context. We get a Slack channel going for anyone who's either kind of driving to the event or is on site, so we can have some kind of real-time quick hits either during or most likely after. And then we do a postmortem after the fact of, hey, how did it go? What did we learn from it? And then also like, were there any interesting sound bites that we can pass along? Or, like our CEO may have heard something really interesting that he's already get 2 steps down the road with, because this person wanted an introduction to a different customer that's already happened. So yeah, just kind of closing the loop and making sure you're being really thoughtful in the prep. And then just kind of what happens after the fact with your internal teams can help this just feel really connected.
Yeah. Absolutely. To me, it's the photos are key for FOMO. So, and you can use it as a marketing tool to get people to other events. Like, hey, here's a collection of some of the experiences that we shared at past events. Like, this is why you should come.
Exactly. Back to like, what's in it for you? Who's going to be there? All the things I was mentioning, like that's a really interesting way. If you think of like, how do you tee up the next one? And you can build some FOMO about, here's the last one. It was a great time. Photos of the event, some people who were there, expect even more at this next one, the next time around in your city. So I agree. You have to just like find the time to pause and take some photos, and putting someone on certain jobs or certain types of jobs the day of and spreading that around can help too. It can get really busy day of an event. I'm sure we all know that.
Sure. Yeah, I did an A/B test at a previous company of the social image, right? Like what would drive the most clicks. And the thing that always won was with a face on it. So it didn't have to be like a real face, and just as long as it had a face on it, people were more interested in clicking on it. So love the idea of making sure that as you're doing this thing, that you're grabbing pictures of smiley people and people in conversations. All right. Speaking of smiley people, hope all y'all smiley people at home are writing in some Q&A. I got a bunch through the registration form, so if you don't mind, I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that we get to some of these. First question here is from Laura Kilbasa. Hope I pronounced that right. If not, I'm sorry. If so, awesome last name. That's great. Have you ever done watch parties where groups of attendees watch a virtual presentation in the same room?
Yeah.
If so, were they successful and why?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It was actually my very first field event long ago was that. I was actually at Dell EMC ages ago. We were doing a product launch that was broadcasted out of a central location. I think it was in one of our large corporate buildings, and then was broadcast to probably at least 15 different more in locations across the country to kind of see it in real time. It was like a very brief presentation. And then that local sales leader, kind of like that curation partner, executive, customer, had lunch with the group of people they brought together. And I always thought that was a very interesting way to scale kind of this concept of like virtual plus in person, that you can kind of still get that one-to-many for anyone who can still just dial in from their home, but also like get some of those intimate experiences, in-person experiences still built in as well. So I think just the concept of hybrid is really interesting. My last company, I was just leaving when they did this. I wasn't there for it, but I heard about the final result after. They ended up doing a broadcast of their large user conference it was a virtual program, but they brought together 50 people to watch it filmed live in a studio, of a kind of a photo studio in New York City. And then they took a group of maybe about, I think the whole group had sort of like a happy hour after. And then there was an intimate group of 20 executives who went out to a very special dinner with Mark Murphy from the Food Network. And he did a whole live cooking demonstration. So it was something I'd helped build. I just was gone by the time it happened, but it was just a way of trying to bring these things together where you can still think about maybe more like virtual content experiences and kind of bringing that into an in-person group. My advice would be, though, keep the content brief, because I don't think people are going to sit there for hours and watch content on a stage. I think it's a bit of a teaser, get some interesting concepts, introduce some fodder for future conversation, and then it's more about the in-person elements and discussion after that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mark, have you run any of these watch party events?
We've tried a few. We've done it with partners in the past. They never really work that well. I think you get dangerous with like people just listening to content. A micro event is not there to listen to content. So I think I agree with everything Becky's saying. You really have to think through it. And I saw it a little bit pre-pandemic. We did it a few times when I was at Drift with some partners. And then as the pandemic was kind of winding down a bit, but I don't think, this is kind of going off topic, I just don't think hybrid ever really happened, Becky. I mean, I don't know, like, there's hybrid, like, I don't see a lot of events ever really positioned or marketed as a hybrid event right now. Do you? Like in the last 12 months?
I've seen a couple, but I don't think it was like the big flood and the big tidal wave that we were expecting. And I'm with you, like it's a very nuanced set of events that nail that. I've also seen this fail miserably when you assume you're going to do a broadcast. People either can tune in virtually or go into the in-person experience and have that. But when you do that, sometimes people would rather sit in their sweatpants and stay home and engage in that way, which doesn't always kind of curate the experience you want ultimately from that program. So it's a fine line. I think the content has to be brief. It has to be a very unique experience that gets people more interested in that part versus the content. It's maybe some kind of a tee up to the in-person discussion. But if your plan is like 3 hours of a watch party together, probably not going to work.
Yeah. We had a few clients that did something very similar, and they mentioned that, the brevity of content was really important in making sure that you are selling the in-person component of that, yes. Right? So it's not just showing up to the movie theater to watch, a session. Right. It's like making sure that you have like a great in-person event. Yeah. It's just kind of like a satellite event to the rest of the main programming. I think y'all have a really great perspective there. All right. So another question that we had come in, which is, what software or where are you putting customer conversation notes, speaker notes, overall takeaways? We glean so many data points at events, but they get lost in our CRM or Excel. So how do you keep that institutional knowledge that you're getting from these events?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think it's probably something we all are
not an easy question to answer.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's about like the type of information too. Like you have to categorize it because not all of it maybe needs to go into the CRM. I mean, if you're doing a micro event and it's about trying to get feedback about an upcoming product, then you have to have one or two people from your product team there, and they need to take the notes, and they need to, for us in my past companies, like you have a wiki and you deploy that to the wiki, like Notion or Atlassian, Confluence, whatever. And it lives there, right? I mean, you could put it in G-Docs, but I just think it's, I think what's the purpose of the data you're trying to collect? That's like, and how would you potentially use it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's, I think it's just the nature of there's information from so many different sources these days and different types of information. I think a couple of tips would be have a Slack channel that can live on as historical record of anything related to that event that you can reference maybe a year later when you want to come back to that region. If you do that dossier document or whatever that recap email was, or we do a lot of like retro slides after, like making sure it's documented, you can kind of refer back. We do have a field in Salesforce anytime that we have contact or lead just related to an event, trade show, or something like this. If there's notes we want to capture, we do physically put it there, or more like on the campaign member in the Salesforce campaign. But yeah, it's not a perfect answer. So I think and some of it's just also like the best feedback is kind of like word of mouth. It happens when someone's grabbing their jacket and heading down the the stairs to go home. And that's also valuable too. That it may not live in Salesforce, but it still serves its purpose and you can action off of it. So not a perfect answer, but hopefully there's some interesting tips there somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea of, well, I guess your event management platform has to do a lot of the work for you there too, right? Of making sure that, you're capturing the right data, like based off of sessions, based off of registrant fields, things like that. You can gather a lot of that info. Not to give to pitch everybody here, but alas. All right, so I have another question here, which is, have you noticed a need for family-oriented micro events, specifically for targeting CXOs? And this one came from Jessica.
Yeah, so I think there's some angle there that's interesting. You also have to have the budget to do that, which is always a downside for me. So I had this really great, when I was at Zora, before I left, we hosted our first executive summit at Carmel Valley Ranch, which was this beautiful resort in California, wine country. And we hosted, I think it was about 35 C-level folks there for 2 days. And that was a really incredible experience for the brand, for just the long-term relationship, but also just pipeline and bookings and all the good stuff. I think the initial goal was to have the person attend and their spouse. And that was a model that we'd seen work at other companies. And I think there's a lot of stickiness to that, but there's also just the complexity that you have to think through if you're going to do some kind of family programming. There's the cost, and there's also what does the family member do if it's separate experiences. And it's almost like an adjacent event you have to create within the event that you're putting together, unless it's just, hey, everyone come to the movies or everyone come to the barbecue and it's just casual. So there's maybe different variations of what family programming could be. We do, not to talk about gifting, but we do see with some of our gifting tools, family related gifts can be very interesting. We haven't really tested tickets to the Children's Museum and see if that would be an interesting thing to get people to come by for some interesting event that's maybe kid oriented, but you get the executive parents there as well. I think there's maybe something that you could experiment with. There's ways to do it really well, but you have to just have that mindset that it's going to come at a cost and just there's some complexity in the programming. It's not a definite no. It's just something you may want to graduate to versus trying to build it in year one.
Oh, Mark, are you muted there?
I think so.
I'm sorry. I was coughing and I muted myself. I apologize. To me, it's a brand play. You're not going to measure pipeline. You're going to measure sentiment and, if they talk about it after, maybe NPS of the event. And it is definitely, I think for most businesses would be, to your point, Becky, definitely that, I'm running with my events and now I want to really pay it back. And I probably would start to do that. And I've definitely seen this at two of my past companies where you do that type of event first for your employees and do an employee family type event. And then you translate that into something that you could do publicly.
That's a great idea. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah, I guess the stakes are a bit higher too when you have family coming there, as well.
Yeah.
So I can tell when I brought my niece places, it was I need to really make sure that she's on her best behavior too as this whole thing goes on. All right. The one question here from Valise, Becky and Mark, what was your most successful micro event that you did? Think back on the most successful, or maybe if there's one that, just really sticks in your brain when we came to asking you about a micro events webinar.
I think mine's an easy answer because I kind of just talked about it. And so we'll give more time to Mark on this one. It was we had this hypothesis of, hey, if we engage not just hundreds of people across the year, if we got those 30, 40 senior executives somewhere really special away from the office, 2 days where it's mostly just relationship building, would that have a meaningful impact in our brand and relationship, all the things that you want to see long-term, but also some short-term as well. And it was a huge success. There are tons of painful moments building it, lots of learnings, but it was something that, it wasn't even so much the numbers that made it a success. It was moments in that program that were so special. There was tears shed. There were hugs given. There were pacts made that people would stay in touch forever. And it was such this interesting, wonderful, adjacent benefit of doing something like this, that you just felt that sentiment and the emotional, intimate moments that you wanted to have come through were there and then some. And that then built so much momentum for the company with these particular accounts that were there. So I was only there for 1 year. I know the company has since brought it back and is continuing it to more of a series, but I'd say it was one that was a ton of work, but for what we saw and some of the tangible and intangible benefits was one that I'll always just think about really fondly.
Yeah, for sure. Oftentimes those intangible benefits that keep me doing events, right? The 2 weeks ahead of the event, you're like, oh my gosh, why do I do this? And then like the actual event comes, like, oh, that's right. That's why we do this. Okay, cool. How about you, Mark? What are some, is there an event that sticks in your brain as like is the successful micro event?
To me, it's always when you bring customer and prospects together at this micro event.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are always typically the most successful, both for the customer and prospect and the company. And then it's just a matter of like what type of experience you want to design. I've been at so many, from very intimate golf outings to like 9-course tasting menus that are like hosted by someone who's just an expert at conversation. And like, I forget the term. It's like when there's no side conversations on the table happening. It's like, what is that term, Becky? Do you know? Do you remember the name? It's a style of dinner. I'm forgetting the term. But yeah, everyone is listening to the one conversation. And though I love those events, by the way. That's a really cool, especially if you have like 10, maybe up to 15 people at dinner. But it requires a host. So I think the other takeaway I'll leave people with is the host of these events is extremely important.
Yeah,
I cannot oversay that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For sure. As the host of this event, I got to say, it's pretty important. It's pretty important. So.
And you did a great job, Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Blow up in the chat. How great it is. But one of my favorite micro events I've heard about was one company that did dueling events the same exact time. They had one event that was at on a rooftop Michelin-starred restaurant on Madison Avenue, and then another one at Panda Express. And the idea was that the one at Panda Express had the CEO of Panda Express coming to talk a little bit more about what Panda Express is up to. And if I honestly think about it, like I would totally go to the orange chicken event at the Panda Express. I love good food, but honestly, orange chicken's a steal. So. As we think about like a lot of these micro events, they don't always have to break the bank, right?
Oh.
Thinking about what are some of the creative ways that, I can both be, I can create an experience. I can, learn from some great people around me. So, awesome.
Doesn't take a steak dinner to surprise and delight. Sometimes it's just some orange chicken.
Exactly. And with that, thank you so much, Becky and Mark, for joining us. Really appreciate y'all sharing your wisdom about micro events. If y'all have any questions for either Becky or Mark, feel free to respond to the email I sent recently, and I'll go ahead and flip them over to y'all. Hope you have a great rest of your week, and looking forward to seeing y'all at our next webinar. Thank you, Becky. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Patrick. Bye, Becky.
Bye.